Hey, it's Susan Ortolano here, relationship and marriage coach. And on this version of Transforming Your Marriage, which is what I'm calling this, I wanted to talk about something a little more serious that affects so many couples, so many marriages, and I'm calling it in sickness and in health. And yes, I'm going to talk about what happens in marriage when somebody has a serious health issue or chronic health condition, and it absolutely changes the state of the marriage. So it's not an easy thing to talk about, but I'm going to first say, when I work with singles, and I worked with singles for quite a while, I still do. Most singles, when they were, really looking at what they wanted from a partner, nobody talked about illness. Most people were like, oh, I want, a guy with six-pack abs and who's really active and really healthy and eats this particular way and all kinds of stuff. It's like most people were not looking for somebody who may have a health condition. So even women, and because I work with single women, even women who were a little bit older, and I'm sitting here going, do you think the six-pack abs for the guy who's 6 years old is going to be realistic moving forward? And so a lot of people were looking at things that were a little more superficial and not really looking at the big picture of what marriage could possibly bring forward. So many of you already know that marriage comes with a lot of unexpected things. And those unexpected things can be very short term, can be very long term, and can be really devastating. And I'm going to share about what you need to do about it, or some of the things that can happen when it comes to health. I'm going to share a personal story, and just again, some things that you can do as a couple, because I have talked to many couples where this is the big issue in their marriage, where it's like everything was going along great, and then somebody came down with some kind of autoimmune disease or chronic illness, and it completely changed what that person was able to do physically. And it absolutely changed their partner's perspective of them. And that was a marriage, these were a couple marriages struggling to hang in there or hang on because of what had happened. Now, obviously, as people get older, there are certain things that are sort of expected. At some point, we're all going to pass away. There's just no getting out of that, right? But somebody's going to have something at some point. And sometimes these unfortunately happen earlier rather than later. But I also want to address, what happens. And certainly I'm not 80 years old or anything like that. I'm going to hit the one that starts with the 6. But I wanted to address this kind of thing because regardless of how long you've been married or how old you are, any kind of medical issue that comes along can be incredibly impactful on the marriage, and not always in a good way. And we want to make sure the marriage can stay together. We want to make sure that you have some tools, at least some tips on how to handle things if something medical happens. And for some people, it does happen very, very young. I had a cousin who at 33 years old, she was a doctor, she was a physician. At 33 years old, she got breast cancer. And she was able to get through breast cancer, but she had 2 kids, 2 twins, and a husband, of course, and it changed the dynamic of things, but she was able to get through it. And then she had a recurrence. It came back. And she went through it again, went through all the treatment, all that kind of stuff. She went into remission. Great. 3rd time. Same thing, went into remission. It really impacted the marriage, and it was starting to kind of pull it apart a little bit, because when something like that happens, it's really difficult for both parties. And some people think it's just difficult on the one who has the cancer or has the illness, but it is difficult on both people. But I will get to what to do about it, how to cope with it. But my cousin went through 3rd time around, got into remission, sort of, but it came back very quickly. And ultimately, she passed away at 41 years old, leaving behind 2 young kids and a husband. And that was a devastating thing to have happen. And I'm not suggesting that everything I'm going to talk about today is about how to cope with a terminal illness, but those do happen. Most people who are younger don't get cancer early. Some do, some don't, but it's not as common as getting cancer later on. And I'm talking about both women and men. Women tend to get, GYN cancers, breast cancer, at younger, and that's why people are suggesting they have mammograms early and all that kind of stuff. Men can get prostate cancer, and cancer in a lot of different places. But when you're young, you just don't think anything's going to really happen. You're not really looking at that. And so the first thing that can happen is really, if you are going into having kids, the woman who gives birth can end up with postpartum depression. And postpartum depression is no joke. It is real. It is something that is so devastating to the woman and definitely impacts the father of the child, the husband as well. And it's something that this couple with a beautiful newborn baby has to work through, and she has to work through it because it is going to throw her off. It will throw the marriage off unless people know exactly what to do. Then we have, the different autoimmune conditions out there that a lot of young people tend to get, lupus and Lyme disease and trying to come up with the top of my head. I just got lupus, Lyme disease. There are a lot of different, thyroid issues. There are a lot of autoimmune things out there that affect women and men when they are younger. People can have diabetes. What is going on physically in the relationship, in the marriage, is definitely going to impact what you're able to do as a couple, your life in an intimacy, kind of from an intimacy perspective. And couples who are older, there's women are going to go through menopause, and that is no pretty picture for a lot of women. And they're younger women who have hormone issues anyway, where it's very severe on a monthly basis, and unless they're treated right, it's not going to really help the marriage or even help the individual. Men can go through what we call andropause, and andropause is where the testosterone drops, and men go through all kinds of different issues around it. So it's not that it's just women getting, all these kinds of illnesses, but as people get older, you can get, dementia, Alzheimer's, those kinds of things, Parkinson's. And Parkinson's, as we know from the amazing Michael J. Fox, that started for him when he was 29 years old. And he, with his wife, Tracy Pollan, decided no. She said no, she's in 100% with him, even though they knew that they would have a huge battle ahead of them. So one of the things, the questions is, how committed are you? You made your vows. You said, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health. Did you really mean that? Or was it just, oh, I don't think anything's ever going to happen to us? And unfortunately, things do happen to a lot of people. We have people who are, not eating well. We have a horrible, dietary situation and a crisis with obesity and diabetes in this country. And people are getting sick. People have a lot of gut issues. People have, from food. There are people who are going into alcohol. I'm not going to get into addiction, but alcohol isn't necessarily great for the body physically. We've got situations where people are so stressed out. We've got anxiety, depression, panic attacks, all kinds of mental illnesses that people are going through that are more present today than they were, 20, 30 years ago. So regardless of whether the situation is physical or mental, as a couple, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to be the one who bolts when your partner, comes down with a diagnosis? Or did you really mean the vows that you took when you said in sickness and in health? Because again, it's easy to make vows and to think that, oh, nothing's ever going to happen to us. But with all the things going on in our country, and for the mental health epidemic, and certainly we all went through all the COVID, a lot of people died, people got sick for long periods of time. Some people it really didn't affect at all. But how do you cope when somebody has either a chronic, terminal, or any kind of health issue that changes the direction that the marriage was going? If you are an active couple, or if you've been an active couple and somebody has a physical illness that has changed what they're able to do physically, it does make a huge impact. If you happen to be two homebodies, it makes an impact, but it makes less of an impact because you weren't really going out and about anyway. And so those who are more introverted or homebodies have it a little better when it comes to having an illness, because there's just, you're not really the travel people, or you're not people doing a lot of socializing. You're really more of a tight couple or family that really stays a lot at home. But if you're a parent, then, and you've got younger kids or you've got teenage kids and you no longer can do a whole lot, then things get put on the other parent, and it just puts a lot of stress. So there's so many things that can happen and that people do not expect to have happen in their marriage around physical and mental illness. Again, starting from hormones, which can be absolutely devastating. Women can have chronic migraines that are devastating, where they literally have to go into a dark room and they get nauseous, vomit, all kinds of stuff, and they're just so piercing. Men can have headache, issues, or any kind of autoimmune, or any kind of, hormone issues as well, as I talked about. So how do you navigate illness in a marriage? First of all, there are, again, different levels of illness. You've got something that's gonna, somebody has an injury, they have surgery, they're gonna get better. Somebody, gets a cold or gets a flu, they're gonna heal, recover, and get better. They may feel miserable in the process, but it's a temporary situation. And I'm referring to things that are not temporary. Even cancer, if somebody has gone through cancer and is in a marriage, there's always a chance, even if they go into remission and get the treatment and all that kind of stuff, that it could come back. It's a pretty scary thing. But while they're going through treatment, whether it's chemo, surgery, radiation, whatever, it does change the marriage. And it changes what the person who's ill can do. And it changes the perspective on everything, because there are a lot of people who, we say in sickness and in health, but a lot of people who are really not patient, or really not interested in being with somebody who comes down with some kind of illness. And if somebody gets some kind of chronic condition, people can get back issues. People can get anything, anywhere in the body. And we just don't know always what's going to happen. And so certainly there's a need to take care of yourself as best as possible. But even if you do take really good care of yourself, if you're very health conscious as a couple, doesn't mean nothing's going to ever happen. So one of the things you can do, and part of the reason why I'm talking about this is because I happen to have a diagnosis of Lyme disease. It's not in my brain, it's in other parts of my body. And I was in between marriages, let's say, because I'd been married before. And I did meet somebody who had a really hard time. I didn't know what it was initially. I just knew I was getting sick. It was like mystery illness. And the guy that I was with initially, when it started to happen, just wasn't interested in dealing with it. We weren't married, we were engaged, but that ended for other reasons. But I still moved forward knowing that I had something going on. Doctors were trying to figure it out and couldn't. And my body was getting worse and worse and worse. And I did meet my husband during that time. So he married me knowing that I had some kind of medical condition that was pretty serious and that was preventing certain things, but he loved me and married me anyway. And we just had no idea how it was going to get. It got really bad for a while. And there's certain things that I'm still not able to do with mobility. Certainly I can do the work that I do, and I'm super grateful for that. But it's something that we've had to navigate as a couple. And fortunately, my husband works for hospice. So he was very prepared because he works with dying people. And he was very more prepared, I would say, than most, because he's also a trained counselor and coach, more prepared for most to deal with, to be in a marriage where somebody had an illness, and it was very severe for a very long time. But he and I just, did some of the things I'm about to tell you, and we were able to not only have a marriage that worked, but have a marriage that thrived, and it is still thriving today. And It's not that he's never had anything, he just didn't have anything chronic. And so what happens? What do you do when you have something that pops up and you're not 80 kind of thing? When you're 80 and your late 70s, maybe things happen, you sort of expect it. But when you're younger, I did not expect at 36 years old to be diagnosed with Lyme disease. Well, how old was I? 36, 37, maybe I was 38. And when I was diagnosed, and the tick bite had taken place when I was 8 years old. So Lyme disease in and of itself didn't show itself right away. It waited years and years and years till my immune system said, yeah, okay, I can't do this anymore. And then it sort of took over and started creating symptoms. So what do you do as a married couple when something like this happens, whether it is something that can be terminal or something that is chronic, something that is maybe in the depression space, maybe anxiety, panic attacks? Those things happen too. People get so stressed, people can have chemical issues in the brain. Maybe your partner has bipolar disorder or something of that nature and needs medication. It does not mean your marriage has to end. It does not mean that it's time for you to turn your back on your partner. That is one of the worst things you can do to yourself and to your partner, is turn your back because somebody got an illness. Because, again, everybody's going to have something, everybody's going to die of something at some point, and you want to be able to, if you love your spouse and you made those vows and everything else was going relatively well, then this is not something you want to have take your marriage out. And so first thing is to, when something happens with somebody and they get a diagnosis, get all the information that you can, turn towards each other. Both of you are going to go through different experiences. The person who has the diagnosis is going to go through one experience, and the person who loves them is going to go through a different experience. But you want to turn towards each other, and you want to make sure you get all the information possible about the diagnosis itself, about what the physician is saying could happen, what is possible, what is necessary, what kind of support, and love, attention, treatment is going to be needed, so that you can really prepare yourselves, but prepare yourselves together. Next, you need some coping strategies from an emotional perspective, because when there is an illness, the person who gets ill goes through a lot of grief, a lot of fear, a lot of anger, and the person who loves them is going to go through that as well. Because if you've been married for a bit and something happens to somebody or an illness happens, there's grieving on both sides. There's grieving for the life that you once perhaps had together that is now going to change and need to have adjustments. You're going to need communication skills, because you're going to need to communicate differently. Again, both of you are going to go through different experiences and have different needs, and it's going to require really good communication and conflict resolution skills. Also, learning how to provide support, request support, say, hey, I'm not up for providing support today, or in this moment, I need to take time out. I need to go do something for myself, because the person who doesn't have the diagnosis is going to, and this is one of the other things, is going to have to nurture themselves. Both parties are going to have to nurture themselves. But back to the emotional impact, you're just going to have to up-level your skill sets and really work with somebody on how to navigate the emotions and the grief that goes along with it. You're also going to have to rebuild up, you're going to have to create a plan together. How are we going to approach this situation? Let's just say it's cancer. How are we as a couple going to approach this? If you have kids who are still living at home, how are we going to get support from the people around us to help with our kids if somebody's going through it and the other person can't handle all of the duties, and really, nor should they have to handle everything? It takes a village. It takes a village to deal with somebody going through that kind of illness. And even with chronic illness, where there's, somebody screwed up their back and had surgery, but they're still in pain and can no longer hike and ski or do whatever the things, things that you were already doing. How are you going to cope with that? You need a new plan. And if you remember the actor Christopher Reeve, when he had his accident and was paralyzed from here down and had to have a breathing apparatus so that he could breathe, his wife did not leave him. They had to deal with everything that I'm talking about. The life they had before was over. That version of the life they had together was over, and they had to come up with a plan. They had to try to figure out how to have some kind of intimacy, even though it couldn't be traditional intimacy. So intimacy gets altered as well as communication, and you really need a new life plan for the marriage. And I just don't recommend doing this alone. I certainly recommend getting support in how to navigate it. So having a plan so that you guys know what is going to be done, how things are going to be structured, because more will need to be structured when somebody's going through an illness. Nurture yourself. Again, as I said before, whether you're the person with the illness, you're going to need some downtime. You're going to need some extra nurturing. Sometimes you're going to need to request it from your partner. Sometimes you're going to get family support, friendship support, group program support, whatever's out there, coach support, whatever support you're going to get, you're going to need it, and you're going to need to support yourself. If you are the person who's married to somebody with the illness, you are also going to need to nurture yourself, because it is incredibly painful, sometimes more painful to watch the person you love struggle with an illness, be in pain, than it is to be in pain yourself. So if you are the spouse of the person who is going through an illness, or, some kind of mental illness or physical illness, you've got to make sure that you get the support that you need, that you nurture yourself, that you make sure to have time to take care of yourself. Otherwise, your tank is going to be on empty, because you're running around providing a lot of support, and you want to make sure that you provide support for yourself. And also, you're going to have to create not only a new plan, but a new vision for your marriage. Visioning is really, really powerful. And when two people come together and say, you know what, now we know that, so-and-so is in a wheelchair and can't use their legs. So we need to have a new plan for the activities we're going to do, the way we're going to handle intimacy, the way we're going to communicate with each other. Because the person who's, let's just say, in the wheelchair is going to have to make more requests, ask for what they need, maybe in a way that they weren't before. And the other person is going to have to be more supportive. So this is just sort of a tip of the iceberg for tips on what to do when illness happens. And it is again, it's like there are more people who are not going through mental health issues, which do need support and need all these things as well. Some people there are a lot of people on medication right now. There are a lot of people with ADD, and again, depression, clinical depression, not just circumstantial depression, hormonal depression, bipolar disorder, all the things that I had mentioned, who now require care, medication, may have times where that needs to be adjusted, but they need love and support and understanding from their partner. And you need a vision for your marriage, because if somebody is going through depression, even if they're on medication, they may not be having a good day one day, or need to be in bed for the day, or need to go to work, function, come back, can't make dinner for the kids, can't be as present for their partner, even though they love their partner. So this is a whole much longer topic, if you will. But these are just some tips to become aware that, this can happen, and you already may be experiencing something like this, as several of the couples that I have talked to and worked with have gone through these different things, and yet you can still have an amazing, conscious, loving, extraordinary marriage. It just may look different than you thought it would. So in sickness and in health, those were the vows that you made. And if you are somebody of integrity, then you will keep your word. You will stand by your partner who goes through the illness or the mental illness or the physical illness and do some of the things, get the support you need. I'm well equipped to support people from a coaching perspective who are going through this kind of situation. Sometimes it's very similar to having other marital struggles, but this is something that has a unique situation connected to it where somebody might be in pain all the time. And because I've gone through it myself and have had an amazing marriage, regardless, in spite of the fact that I have this diagnosis and I have some symptoms, I'm well equipped to help people really look at what they can create with their marriage, regardless of what's happening. So I hope this helps somebody, because I know it's not necessarily what everybody goes through, but at some point, somebody's going to go through some kind of physical or mental situation, and you really want to know how to navigate it, know what to do, know how to keep your marriage vibrant, know how to keep your marriage, the intimacy in a way that you can do intimacy. You want to be able to communicate well through it. You want to still be able to resolve conflict through it. You want to be a trustworthy person because, yeah, it's like one person may say, you know what, my husband can't have sex anymore, so I'm going to go out there and get it. Well, that's not honoring your vows. That's not being a person of integrity unless it's a mutual decision between you and your spouse. If it is not a mutual decision, it's called having an affair, and it's not going to change the situation. It's just going to compound the pain for both of you. And so being able to stand in integrity about the commitment you made to your spouse in sickness and in health, for better, for worse, is the way that you're going to be able to at least have the foundation to be able to navigate anything that comes your way from that aspect. So this is Susan Ortolano, Transforming Your Marriage. Susan Ortolano.com. Yeah, I know my own name. And if you are a couple or part of a couple that is struggling with something like this, I am very well equipped, as I said, to work with issues like this and have people continue to have extraordinary conscious marriages, regardless of what's going on with their physical or mental health. So I hope this helps somebody, and I will be back another time. Bye now.